Hi everybody, welcome to the WHU Most Awesome Founder podcast, a show about entrepreneurs, innovators, advisors and educators, and the stories that make them who they are today. I'm your host Dries Vaams, and today we welcome to the podcast Karel Dörner. Karel is a WHU alumnus, was one of the original people at one of the most illustrious startups in the WHU ecosystem, and nowadays is a senior partner at McKinsey. Karel, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Dries, for having me. Thank you.
We always start this podcast in the same way, namely we want to give our guests the floor to do some personal storytelling about their background, where they're coming from. So I would say the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, you already alluded to it. So I'm indeed, I was a WHU alum and graduated in 98, so class of 98. And as I was the roommate of Oliver Sumber, and we spent a lot of time together, we also agreed during the studies at WHU that we would found a company together. That was sort of the original starting point. Then I nevertheless started on a serious note and went to McKinsey at that time. So I made an intern at McKinsey, and I said, okay, well, if we have the right idea, I'll come, but let me just start my professional life. And then it took 6 weeks that I was with McKinsey that Ollie called me and said, okay, here's the idea now. So you rather decide. And yeah, I mean, that decision was made very quickly. I think over a weekend, I then said, okay, I promised you that. So I step out of McKinsey. I left a pretty exciting project on its own. I think the partners and everybody around it were not so excited about it. And I remember, actually a very nice story about it. I served one of the big public banks, and there was a very difficult client who was always, let's say, challenging our teams. And I had the pleasure with like my young tenure to serve that client, and nobody would dare to actually approach him. And then when I said, okay, I have to leave, they told me, okay, you need to get all the different clients and tell them that you're off the project. They just started to work with you. So please, you take the hit on that directly. And I said, okay, I mean, let's have the tough conversation. I went up to him, and then he stood up, and I was almost, afraid that he would tear me apart. And he closed the door and said, it's really interesting what you are planning to do. So, and I mean, the spoiler is that we planned to build Alando, which essentially then was a copy of eBay at that time. So I told him the plan about it, and he closed the door and said, that is really interesting. I mean, let me, I'm a wine collector, so I would actually like to, if you really get this platform up and running, I would actually like to put my personal wines on it, and I have some sources in Italy, so maybe I can use your platform to sell something. And we're talking about 98. So long story short, that very difficult client turned up to one of the maybe earliest user of Alando at that time. And it shows that you should never be afraid to follow your passion and also take the tough conversations. So I mean, without going all the details, I mean, we kicked off Alando, went to Berlin. I mean, I guess books are written on this. I guess there are the real stories and the less real stories, but I mean, it was a great experience. And I mean, me personally, we as a team learned a lot. And yes, and then famously we saw IP addresses or domains from eBay San Jose on our servers, and we knew something was cooking there, and we sold the company. Ollie would always say that was the biggest mistake in the life to sell it too early. As I always was the more balanced person, I would say maybe it was a big mistake. On the other hand, maybe it was exactly right, and I think it didn't hurt him, me, and everybody involved. I think we learned a lot, and essentially then. The history goes on. I was also one of the 5 founders that then left eBay after around a year, on New York State. And then interestingly, I guess, I mean, I was also almost in the next plot of Yamba, but I somehow decided, I guess it's the intimate part, but I also wanted to rather keep the friendship than going into the next gig. So essentially I said, okay, let me do something else. And then I was actually very, very briefly, I was joining an incubator in Frankfurt. And then through that, I got to know to a tech team or developer team that left Amazon at that time. And that was actually quite interesting because they had a bit of a similar story. I mean, they were not the founders, but like the most senior engineers of Jungle. Jungle was actually a pretty big acquisition that Amazon did in 97, 98, so very much at the same time. And they wanted to leave Amazon. I left eBay, so we somehow thought that's a good idea to combine the two, at that time, I guess, most prominent, let's say, successful internet plays. And then we founded a company in the US, actually. So they were based in Bellevue in Seattle, and I was still in Germany. But we said, okay, let's build this as a software company. And so I was essentially a founder and CEO of a software company then overnight. That story was a much longer one, a much more difficult ride, I honestly can say. So we had great investors. We had, the idea was actually at that time to, what everybody was talking about, to build content aggregation to take content from the internet to mobile devices. And we're talking about all pre-iPhone, 2001, 2002. So idea was, I think, straightforward. They were good technologists. I mean, Jungle actually was a scraping technology. So indeed, they built the web crawling technology that then went into Amazon. So we thought, okay, now I thought also that that's the best tech team that I can find to get something like this running. And so we did, but then we hit that entire, let's say, bubble burst where essentially also we thought that the mobile operators would be the primary clients for that. Didn't really turn out like that. And so we pivoted the company and made it a B2B play, which was also good learning. And we then we essentially used it as a content aggregator, but for ERP data to push it to mobile devices. So that then became like a last mile field service or logistics software. I think it's a long story and also tough story because, I mean, we did that at a point where technology was just not mature enough. So we had to build a lot of the underlying, let's say, almost operating system and transaction handling and securing the data flows ourselves. And so as the infrastructure was not really yet there. And I think we somehow were also not, I mean, our tech was also not the best for a B2B environment. So essentially we started quite some exciting programs and projects in Europe, interestingly, because the clients, the corporate clients were much more open to mobile applications than the US. I mean, US was still a pager-dominated environment. So we had customers in Europe. We had the software developer, the architecture in Seattle, and then actually we had the developers, the engineers, mainly in India, because these were all Indian originated co-founders. And I tell that because essentially what happened is that we had our projects. We were not really a product company yet. I mean, I think we had a product market fit, but it was still a lot of single project lifting to get the software implemented. And we had a very complex structure with like around the clock operations. I mean, it sounds great, but it meant that I was 7 days, almost 24 hours on fire. And I have to say, I mean, the company somehow grew and we had more than 100 people. Then we actually also had to scale back a bit. I mean, as the revenue and funding equation didn't match up. And then after 5 years of quite some, lot of sweat, lot of, let's say, big learnings. My wife actually turned to me and said, I mean, we have to talk because, I mean, you're essentially, I mean, I know that Alando and eBay and McKinsey, I mean, that's all a lot of work, but now you're even beyond that scale, and that was not the deal that we had. And so essentially, I think I saw that the company would not scale to the level or become a true product company. So I decided to step out. The company is called Avention. I mean, a bit similar to Alando, and we just, as all the others were not very innovative on Zalando because they put just a Z in front of it. I was also not so innovative. Avention still exists. That's actually the nice part of it. A management team in the Netherlands. We had some customers in the Netherlands. We were incorporated in Wageningen. Wageningen was our location for whatever reason. And that team bought the company then, and they're still running it. They're building software for logistics, trucks companies. I mean, it's a small player, but I'm still happy that we're now celebrating, I think like 22 years of existence. So at least it remained. And and then I was at a point where I had to decide, okay, what's next? Obviously, there was contact to the Sunverse and there was the next plot going on. But somehow I also, maybe because that was a pretty tough learning ride these 5 years, I somehow wanted to step a bit out of the true, like only operational role of a founder. And I wanted to almost get some more strategic inspiration. And then I reminded myself of McKinsey as a place where this should be possible. I re-entered McKinsey almost like a new recruit. I mean, I was not even an alum because I left so quickly that the McKinsey rules would not make me an alum. And I was really starting again. And I joined our tech practice at that time. It was called the Business Technology Office. And that turned out to be a pretty good place to me because I was now with software, 5 years of a software company. Also at Alando, I somehow got into the software development amongst many other things that we did in parallel. And so, I essentially started tech and digitization programs, still primarily in the consumer space, because I mean, that's also the e-commerce heritage that I brought with me. And since then, and that's now a pretty crazy 18 years time frame, I'm serving clients, I mean, in different sectors. It started primarily in retail, but also work in B2B industrial sectors. Whenever it's about essentially building technology and bridging to end users, so direct to customer transitions are quite an important topic these days. I mean, sometimes just plain retail tech transformations. There was actually an interesting experience. I was I joined one of my clients for a year as a seconded chief technology officer. That was MediaMarkt Saturn 5 years ago. Because I knew them, they trusted me, and I somehow kicked off a transformation then, but without leaving McKinsey, which at that time I wanted to stay with the firm, and essentially that we found that model. And so I always try to go quite deep into my client work and bridging sort of the, let's say, more strategic conceptual advisory to like really making transformations work. And that's one thing. And the other thing I do is within McKinsey, I work with many colleagues on supporting fast growth companies. So, I mean, we're serving actually sometimes startups, or I mean, more scale-ups, but also even sometimes some small startups. We work with some of the, also I would say, most delicious founders closely together, because in the end, I think it's not so, I mean, I know that there's a perception that McKinsey is only serving the big companies, and that it's sort of a bit of a box that we are put into. But if you think about it, I mean, as speed and vertical depth and also sometimes some really like excellent, be it on the technology side, be it on analytics, be it on go-to-market. I mean, we have these capabilities as a global firm with now more than 40,000 consultants and also experts. And so if we can find a good match where we also then put part of our fees at risk, we even sometimes do equity arrangements. So we are finding, I think, now quite innovative models to work with fast growth companies together. And that's sort of the other part of what I do. I mean, the more classical tech transformations for established players, but also this working with, as we like to call them, the shapers of tomorrow. So that's pretty exciting, and that keeps me busy all day.
Perfect. Fascinating story, I would say. And of course, I briefly want to go back to 1998 because you mentioned quite some fascinating things. Being the roommate of Oliver Zander, you don't hear that a lot. But I would be very interested to kind of get your feeling about what was the vibe in 1998 in WHU, in the circle that you had, because I think actually we might have a similar situation today. We see now this generative AI, nobody really knows what it will mean, but there's a lot of promise, a lot of excitement, but also people see risks. And I can imagine that in 1998, there was maybe a similar kind of vibe. Can you maybe give a bit more background or how you experienced that point in time?
Yeah. No, I think, I mean, it's a super question, because indeed, I think we are, I mean, Gen AI, and we can go a bit on that one, because I think it has similarities, also it has quite some big differences.
Okay.
But I would, I mean, first of all, what was the vibe? I think, I mean, I would argue that like in 94, I think when we started our studies, we got an email address that I think nobody really knew what to do with it, to be very honest. And so I think, and then internet, there was some, I mean, these were the early days of the internet. So you used it for some communication, a bit of research, it was an academic network in the end. I think the next thing that also was happening was I don't even remember the names, but you had essentially these ego shooter games that you would do like as a connected gaming. And I mean, I remember that there was the computer. We had this computer room under the chapel. I think that was where the computer access was. And I mean, I would argue that most time spent there was on playing this ego shooter as a online. I mean, there were online versions of that already at that time, so that was interesting. Then I think, I mean, I know that's also quite famous when Ollie and Max went to Silicon Valley and did this research project. I mean, I picked a very different topic. I had a project on real options, and I essentially I went into quite some scientific real option pricing with Arndt Hochzameier at that time. He was pushing very big time the topic of real options, which I found fascinating. So Ollie and Max came back. I think then, we could argue that they had all these interviews and there was a lot of, let's say, inspiration from there. But I think what now the new business model would be or what the internet is, I mean, in all fairness, I think we still didn't grasp that. And then, I mean, I guess in the end, maybe nobody grasped it really. I mean, the eBay story, I think it's also fair to say, we used Mary Meeker's analyst report on eBay. I mean, eBay went public in summer 98 or something like September 98. And I think, and Mary Meeker, I mean, for the ones that don't know her, she was at that time, and I think for many years, she was like the most prominent investment banking analyst that covered Silicon Valley. And she wrote a pretty precise report how eBay worked, what were the economics, what was the differentiation. So I think it's fair to say we used that report as the blueprint. That was our business plan. I mean, so we didn't waste too much time on writing a new business plan.
That was a kind of template you could just take over.
It was a template, and I mean, it was very clearly. I mean, it was just fascinating, and yes, we really copied. I mean, and I know. I mean, there are also the big discussion where we at that time, and then also later on, the summer was only copying. I think that's not the point. I mean, in the end, there was. I think it was not the intellectual property per se. It was identifying. I mean, we built on a proven product market fit in our region. Full stop. And so we did what Pierre Midar and his co-founders also did. I mean, we went into the collectors arena. We started with. I mean, I was going to stamp fairs in Nuremberg, and then Ollie went to the coin collectors in Munich, and we essentially we started in that crazy, let's say, very niche segment. Surprise, surprise. I mean, then mobile phones and computer became the most relevant category, even after like 2 months. And remember, everybody had his categories that he was responsible for, and because in the beginning, nobody was really interested in computers and telephones, so I said, I'll take it. And then it happened to become the most important category. So Ollie was always looking, hey, you guys need to deliver because that's where we drive transactions, and that's where the revenue will come from eventually. So I think we learned as we went through this. Yes, we had some idea on what we wanted to land with. I mean, as eBay was already, I mean, quite famous and scaled quite impressively. But also the fact that we sold so quickly, I think also is an expression of that. I mean, you always can say we have a dream and you have a vision and you have an exact view on what you end up with. And I think it's fair to say we didn't at that time. Yeah, we just went into it, we built it. And then, I mean, the big discussion on selling or not was, I think in the end, we knew that eBay would come to Germany, would come to Europe in any case, and with us or without us. And I think it was somehow a bit the respect that, I mean, we had competitors, so it was not like that we were the only one, definitely not. But I think we somehow assessed that, okay, maybe it's better to join the giant than to fight them. And now, but I think back to your question, I think there was and then we saw, I mean, many others jumping on that. And I remember, I mean, also at McKinsey and in other places, I mean, I think there was almost that perception, if these few folks can do it, then, I mean, everybody can do it. Yeah, I mean, I think that we're also not as respected as we may think. And and yes, I mean, there was a lot of I think it's fair to say we somehow triggered a hype that then, and it was exactly that cohort of fellow students that were, I mean, maybe still some of them brighter, better marks, I don't know, but I think there was a perception. I mean, literally, if they can do it, then everybody can do it, and I mean, so many of the also successful startups were founded. I mean, many more that were not successful were founded at that time. I remember, which was, I think that's a signal if things are overhyped. I think I remember there were, I mean, I guess I can tell it. I mean, when, for example, 1-2-Snap, they had a funding party. I mean, they essentially got a fundraising, quite a lot of money, and they had a big party to celebrate their Series A, which was at pretty ridiculous valuation. I think if somebody invites you to a funding party and wouldn't spend money on that, then I think you know that something went overboard.
Yeah.
I think we also saw that. Yeah. So to your point a bit, I mean, there was this like very like fast, in some way also hype on building an internet company, which then, I mean, also the real story is that then the crash that I also mentioned, which I experienced myself, I mean, that also put us all back to Ice Age in some way, because there was then all the people that were saying, okay, it was clear this was only hot air, there was no substance, they were never making money. I think the important, and I'm not saying that you need to be net profitable in year one, but I mean, eventually, Alando and eBay, we were net profitable in year one, because we essentially early on introduced the fee model, and we really didn't lose money, maybe only for the first 9 or 10 months, and then since then we were profitable. So, but most other companies were not, and there was that perception that, okay, now it's proven that this is only overhyped and back to basics. I mean, and I think it almost cost. I mean, this disillusion in some way definitely put the whole scene back for a couple of years, because I mean there were quite a lot of individuals that also saw that things would not go as expected. And so I think we will always see these cycles. I think the big difference these days, the big difference is, I think we're entering in a much more professional foundation. And I mean, if we look at Gen AI as the big theme, I mean, I think it's quite fascinating to see that already now in year 1.5 after ChatGPT was launched, I mean, it's apparent that all big tech companies are likely the ones that are also taking the gain from that. That I think the adoption cycle have shortened. I remember a year ago, one of my clients, a CTO that I also worked a lot with and I respect a lot. I mean, he had a look at it and he said, I mean, we definitely will do things and we will explore, I mean, all the opportunities. But in the end, the winners are the hyperscalers, because the compute power is what will drive. And I think it's actually an interesting, also what I see with quite some of my clients. I mean, now suddenly cost becomes a topic in applying and scaling AI and Gen AI driven solutions. So I think what I want to say is that I think the ecosystem and the value pools, I think are, I mean, it's not like that it's only the startups that will grab it. I think the established tech players are quite relevant and maybe almost dominant. I mean, I'm not saying that there will be a lot of opportunities, but I think you need to be very sharp on what really is the distinction, and I think it's actually promising in the sense that we see these adoption curves being quite fast. I mean, again, the famous Bill Gates citation, I think we're always overestimating the change over the next 2 years and underestimating the one of the next 10 years. I think that's also something that we see right now. I mean, there is a bit of an overhype also on Gen AI that we now, I think as we speak now in March 24, I think we're seeing some not cooling down, but some more challenging questions. Some companies also are seeing that piloting something is not scaling it.
Yeah.
But so I think it's I mean, the similarity I would draw is it's a great shift. I mean, there is a shift in the way that technology can accelerate let's say innovation and there's more belief in this, which I think is also important. I mean, executives, CEOs, investors are believing in things that they may have not believed in a year or 2 years ago. But then on the other hand, I think there's also a more complex, a more crowded, let's say, landscape with the big tech players definitely taking their bit out of it. And I think, I think I held a speech on NOAA 2017 or 18, and I said at that time, just assuming that you put AI into your startup presentation or pitch will not increase your valuation. And I think we were still a bit in that area that you need to build some substance. Just calling it an AI company, it's easy to call it like that, but I think you need to really make sure that there is really a substance to it. And I think that's something that I see, at least in my daily work, that you need to still, like always, you need to really make sure that there is some differentiation, there is some uniqueness, some like true problem that you're solving. And I think that challenge is there as 25 years back. But on the other hand, again, the time to bring something to market and to also grow it, I think they have shrank, and so the race is definitely a quite fascinating one.
Yeah. But so you would say maybe in 1998 that the playing field was more open, and now you see already that the tech players have taken a kind of dominant position, and so when you as a startup wants to become a player in this field, you will have to find kind of your position next to these big players that are out there, I would suppose. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think we're seeing a much faster adoption to a more vertical specific solutioning. I think I think the innovation cycles per se are getting shorter. And again, I'm not saying that the opportunities are not there, but I think you need to really understand the field much better. Again, we did at that time, I think we did some analysis, but we didn't take too much care of like local competitors, and we had a bit of that far away US let's say poster child as a reference. I think these days, you need to be much more diligent on what's out there and really understanding what, the famous product market fit question still remains, but I think the product needs to be more specific, and the market is definitely also more specific and maybe also more granular than what we had at that time.
Yeah. Maybe one more question about the past, and then we go more to the current point, because you already mentioned there was this time that Alando had to decide, do we do this exit to eBay, yes or no? And again, there has been a lot of debate about that, whether it was the good move or the right move, and that's of course always speculation. What I'm more interested in is to think about, you have these 5 very young guys having started this some months ago and getting this offer from eBay. How do I have to imagine the discussion that you guys had? Was it that you were sitting together with some pizza boxes and just having a very in-depth discussion? Or how do you in the end make that decision to go for eBay, yes or no?
I think maybe, my personal view again, and then 6 of us, we're 6 of us. One I think was quite fascinating, and again, with 3 brothers and 3 friends, I think that's a pretty unique constellation anyway. But
yes,
but I have to say, we had big fights. We screamed at each other. It was definitely not always harmony. But I think on the really important decisions, it's somehow, and that's also what I have to say. I appreciate a lot on Ollie, but also the 2 others, and all 6 of us. I think we had somehow that attitude. If there was really an important decision, we got actually very, how should I say that? Maybe not rational, but we rather calmed down than almost the opposite. So I think we had the moment where we said, okay, let's face it. This is, on the one hand, a pretty cool thing. We're almost living a dream here, and we would have not thought about it. I think we were not. Again, we also didn't know what then would happen. The Neue Markt and like the what happened like in parallel was also in itself very hard to explain and to predict. I remember that. I think it was Ricardo, like the other auction site, that then went public on the Neue Markt and was valued $1 billion. I think it was Deutsche Maxim, or at that time. So it was essentially, there was a bigger number than what we sold for. And yes, for sure, you have the impression. We knew that we were bigger and better than Ricardo ever was. So but I mean, in the moment that we decided it, I think it was almost, it was not, I mean, it was not a long discussion. I think there was a bit of an assumption that, okay, this was already pretty exciting to get here. I have to admit, I personally, maybe more than Ollie and the others, I think I also really wanted to join eBay and looked at it at a new place. So I was almost like really taking, let's say, the eBay journey as my personal one. I mean, the fact that then it didn't for a very long time stay like that, I think is also a bit of a fact that, yes, we also underestimated again, myself, I can speak for myself. I guess I also underestimated the difference between being a co-founder, being, let's say, being the difference between being a co-founder and being a country manager for a listed US company, where then essentially you got into a very different rhythm. Decision-making process was also quite different. I mean, I think one nice anecdote I guess I can tell is that when we sold it and we just went on, I mean, I think in that moment we didn't stay back. We were anyway working hard and that didn't change. I mean, there was nobody of us was like going on vacation or something. We just moved on. And one thing we were fascinated about, again, it was a bit of my pet project also, was to launch B2B. So, I mean, naturally you have B2C, and we said, okay, let's launch B2B. And we essentially opened up categories, went very deep into what are the most prominent categories. And then, I mean, we got some listings on, so we applied the same, let's say, playbook on B2B. And then I remember we listened into an analyst call, and then I think there was a Goldman analyst asked the CEO, Meg Whitman, then, I mean, why is eBay, or is this now a big shift in your strategy that you're moving into B2B? And she didn't know about it. We didn't tell her, and we just did it. She was very elegant. She said, yeah, we sometimes test out and want to learn new things. So she just had a very elegant answer on the spot. But apparently that was also, and then we had a conversation later on to say, okay, guys, I mean, we appreciate your entrepreneurship, but I mean, there's sometimes things we need to discuss. And I think it was one of the moments where you also recognized, okay, something that in the past we would have just decided and go for, now we would have to align and make it part of a strategy process. And I mean, eBay was already like a fast mover compared to many others, but for us it was rather slow. And we somehow then, I mean, saw that moving on and let's say rather funding the next company would be, let's say, more natural. So I think that's just a movie that we went through. Again, I think it didn't hurt us in the end. It made us in some way, in different ways, to what we are today still. Yeah. And so I don't regret it. I mean, again, and it's a philosophy, or it's in vain to discuss what would have happened.
That's always speculation, not? So that's difficult. Yeah. Okay, but then let's indeed jump a bit to today, because now, of course, you're a bit at the other side of the river, and now you're at McKinsey and actually helping fast-growing companies. Can you maybe explain a bit why that kind of companies is sometimes reaching out to you? Why would kind of fast-growing companies kind of hire McKinsey? What kind of questions do they have for you?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, first of all, the type of questions and also the type of support is very broad. I mean, it can go from, I mean, I maybe the more obvious ones are, okay, we have a proven product in a specific market. How can we scale globally? How can we enter the US? So then, I mean, we have definitely a good network and presence in the US. So there are things like go-to-market acceleration, go-to-market expansion moves that we can help, be it on the more tactical side. If you take, for example, software SaaS companies, I mean, what's always interesting is that they like to sell their product, but they're not really strong in understanding the vertical and business context that's then the decision makers are consuming or may consume the product. So doing that translation, for example, is an example that we support on. But it can also be more strategic topics. Like, I mean, we do a lot, I would say, for the last 5 years, McKinsey has definitely doubled down on everything around the sustainability aspects, like things like how to really create business opportunities in the whole context of sustainability. I mean, we also, and I should have said that, and that's also what I do myself and many other colleagues, we also help clients to build companies. So it's not like only that we wait till somebody founds a company and then we help, but we have a lot of experienced business builders in our team. We have a whole practice called Leap by McKinsey, which is truly helping clients to even start earlier and then take a view, okay, what is an unfair advantage that we have as a company? And then how can we actually build a new proposition? And then we bring the different skill sets together, be it product management, be it tech architecture, analytics, sales. So I guess the point is there are various different combinations. I mean, back to the question, what we can help existing scale up or fast growing companies to do. I think one is on the commercial expansion for sure. Another one can be to also help to improve the product. I mean, we have, I think, really damn good technical talent these days. I mean, be it on the software side, be it on the data analytics, data sciences side. I mean, 5,000 data scientists are now in McKinsey. So people that build models and not PowerPoints, for sure not. So, I mean, there's really some very different, very deep contribution we can bring. I think the verticalization expertise is very important. I mean, to understand how a vertical, a function works, where there's the business potential, the impact, and also then translating that to very specific large enterprises and helping these fast growth companies to better penetrate, let's say, an existing customer. That can be a topic of that. So I think it's really it's a broad range of help. I mean, organizational also challenges. I've helped one of the fastest growing companies 2 years ago. That was like literally the fastest growing company, I think, even globally, to change the operating model. Yeah, from a hit and go, and everybody did everything, to a more dynamic, still very, let's say, agile, but fluid, scalable operating model. Yeah, how do you build teams? How do you build structures? What are the incentive schemes? What are the measurements? So, and if you think about these elements, like, for example, I'm a big fan of applying a pretty stringent KPI logic to steering also these transformations. So, and really playing this through. What are the drivers? How do they relate together? What are some of the benchmarks? I mean, this is knowledge that if you can tap into a global pool of 40,000, let's say, experienced people and our functions and vertical sector specialists, I mean, I think you can help also a smaller company to do things better and faster than if they would explore this all for themselves.
Yeah. And of course, I would say the startup environment has been quite drastically changing in the past years. We had the zero interests period where it was all about valuation and quick growth, and maybe profitability is not that important in the short term. Whereas I think today it's quite a different setting where people expect that you are kind of profitable, not maybe from the start, but very quickly, that you're not just burning cash. How has that influenced kind of the support that you provide to that kind of companies?
I mean, first of all, I think some of the, let's say, like really scale ups, I mean, companies that are already out there for a long period of time, that have grown rapidly. I mean, there are definitely quite a few cases where suddenly, efficiency, performance, costs is becoming a big topic. And that's also something we helped and are helping as we speak quite a few players. Because again, here, I know that's something that McKinsey in particular is very much known for. I would argue it's definitely not the only thing we do, but I mean, it's one of the things we know how to do. And yes, suddenly that also becomes relevant, and I think that is one outcome of that. But I think more important is that I think the time of cheap money is over, and I think it forces also in the fundraising, but then also in follow-up funding. I think it forces the companies to really be sharper on where do they create value, what is really their differentiation, and I think it actually is a healthy effect. I know it's tough, and again, I had my own heydays and also my low days as an entrepreneur. So I'm not mocking around that. And I know how tough it is, for example, to also fire the people that you hired a few months ago. Yeah, I mean that's definitely no fun.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be fair that I mean not every company out there, even with strong funding and strong investors, is really earning its money. And so I think that shake up indeed I think has some positive effects. And I think I'm quite optimistic. I think it's not like, I know that the number of startup getting founded has decreased in 23, and there is, I mean, and there are many other challenges we have as an economy, as an ecosystem in Europe. But I'm still not. I'm quite optimistic that we will find the next generation of founders and also maybe serial entrepreneurs that, in particular, in these days where it's more, let's say, challenging, that also will bring the quality and will also, I mean, survive that. And I think there's a lot of, I mean, you know that better than I, but there's a lot of research also that some of the most successful companies have actually been founded in the periods of, let's say, of very difficult environments and with a lot of headwind. And so, and I think it's the fact that when you are starting a company in this period and you are able to really innovate something, to find a good product market fit, that then you are actually also you have a much higher success rate to then grow and survive and sustain. So but I mean, to your point, I think that the times definitely have changed. I think we were in 21, 22. I think we really have seen an overheated period, because I mean, for example, I just recently I talked to both investors and founders, and I mean, they told me we know there were some illustrious, very aggressive venture capitalists out there that essentially signed term sheets like in 24 hours without any diligence. Yeah, and I mean, then I think that doesn't sound healthy, because I mean, there needs to be some, let's say, I mean, I think you need to start putting some time into what are you actually buying, and also understanding the assets, the team, the strength, the USPs, and so if I mean, I think if we a bit like, if we either have parties for Series A funding, or if we have term sheet turnaround cycles of less than 24 hours, I think we should at least be alarmed that these are maybe not sustainable days.
These are very clear warning signals that maybe something is not fully right. That's true. I also noticed that you actually are often co-authoring studies with McKinsey about the topic of high growth firms and scale-ups. And when I took a look at these studies, I often noticed that the word ecosystem is kind of a word that pops up quite regularly in these studies. So it seems that you think that's a very important kind of concept. Can you maybe explain a bit why you think that this concept of ecosystems is getting so important for scale-ups and high growth firms?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's a pretty difficult term, because I think ecosystems is, in some way, it's all or nothing. Yeah. So I mean, yes, we use the term, but I also have to say that, I mean, I guess in the end, I wouldn't go for a scientific definition, but I think when we, for example, talk about the European startup ecosystem, that's really something that's also, I mean, I'm very passionate about, and I mean, some colleagues and myself, we're really following this up over years now, and I think when we use the term ecosystem in that context, I think it's really the fact that startups are not the only way of innovation. They're not, I mean, they're, depending on how you measure it, I mean, they're actually a smaller part of the overall economy. Yeah. But I think what I find so fascinating is they are a very crucial driver of innovation, of new growth, of new revenue potential, of new products. And so they are often, I mean, like, really, they are driving a lot of development, and there's a lot of leverage of what comes out of the startup ecosystem into the broader economy. And so I'm truly believing that we need to have more startups, more founding activities, also as a let's say as a region and as a society in general. And that's why, I mean, I think, first of all, it's very important to have startups as part of the overall economy. Now, the ecosystem the startup ecosystem then in itself, I think what I see here is that we need to also make sure that startups are not seen as only as a test bed, or as a let's say as a how should I say that? I mean, that it's only for experimentation, but I mean, but I think the bridging innovation from startups to also existing large corporations to public sectors, I mean, making these connections and allowing for faster scale, I think that's a big, also again, societal success factor. If we get better in this connectivity and that scaling, and also get away from the perception that only large companies can sell to other large companies, but no, I mean, startups can sell to large companies. I mean, I just come out of a meeting with I found a very fascinating green tech company, or not green tech, but it's essentially in the broader scheme of ESG business innovation. Won't name the company now, but they told the story how they essentially within less a year, which actually is quite an achievement, have been able to become accredited in a supplier of one of the largest German industrial conglomerates, and that this in itself actually has been very important for them to develop their product further. It shows that this connectivity and that linkage, I think, in itself is a very important driver. And I think we need to get away from that perception it's startups against established companies, but it's much more, where can we find the connectivity, where can we scale also the innovation, and then startups want to sell to other large companies. So I mean, it's often for them it's the most important source of revenue, and then revenue drives like the company value, and so I think and to make that bridge, and to also get away from these like box thinking. It's one box, it's the other one, but rather open up the box, and also the public sector. I mean, I think there are many smart people, and we also would support that. I mean, we always talk about how the public and the governments can subsidize, can put, let's say, can invest into startups. I think the more effective ways to buy the products, and then essentially become a customer of this of startups, and allow them to essentially also sell to the public sector, which in the US actually is a very effective way. And the big departments of Interior and Defense and others have very strategic approaches to that, which I haven't seen to the extent here in Europe yet. Yeah. So, but I think these are all examples how these different stakeholders need to rather work together and collaborate than to look at this in silos. And I think that's when we'd like to use the term ecosystem. Yeah, okay. Be it the ecosystem between startups and other stakeholders, but also be it the startup ecosystem on its own. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I really like the point that you raised about the government as a kind of early customer or a lead customer, whatever it's called. And we actually have seen in the academic world also quite some studies that can be a very kind of productive approach. And again, indeed, in the US, you have this kind of best practice examples also, like DARPA in the defense sector, that has been very successful in that. Now, how optimistic are you about this in Germany, where I would say there is a kind of risk aversion, and sometimes I would say for very good reasons, because you want to protect your citizens. So some risk averseness, I think, can be understood. But in this kind of current mindset that we have in the public sector, this kind of approach about we want to be the kind of first customer of startups, are you optimistic, or would you say that there is still a long way to go?
I mean, I think maybe one of the reasons why we do these reports that you mentioned, where we also analyze a bit. I mean, we always try to take a very fact-based view on what's the potential, what's the, let's say, what is at stake, and then we're not as prescriptive now what exactly has to happen, or we would also, I mean, we don't want to now put a specific government or agency on the hook, because I mean that's I think that's also not helpful. I mean, in the end, what we can do is that we show why it's relevant to change these behaviors. And yes, we are also, I mean, as an advisor, we're also sometimes part of helping how to structure that and get it implemented. I mean, to your question, I think I mean, I think it's fair to say we are in times of so much uncertainty, and I have to also say, I mean, it's always easy to blame our government or the public sector for being too slow and being too risk averse. On the other hand, I think everybody who makes that criticism also can ask themselves, okay, why don't they try to get into the public service and change it from within? So, and I think there are always signs and signals that this is understood. I think for sure I think where we need to put up the pressure is that we in the let's say public discussions, I think we need to point out when we are, I mean, when things are not decided or where decisions take far too long for not very good reasons. I think there is a big question around, okay, how can we shorten decision time? How can we also allow for more rational decision making, but not at sort of always waiting too long. I think it is indeed, I think the US in particular, it's quite fascinating to see that some of these mechanisms seem to be in a more, how should I say that, in a better place, where some of the, I mean, also big decisions are not only taken and then communicated, but they're really effective. I mean, they're like the programs are established. I mean, the I guess the Anti-Inflation Act is a good example where this happened in a very short time with some good strategic backing behind it. And yes, I think in Europe we also have to deal with other mechanisms, but it takes too long. And I think that's to criticize that, I think, is fair. But then we need to also help to find the solutions to really accelerate it. And then again, I'm not a fan of always finger pointing on the others, but rather than, okay, where can we start to change it in our own decision processes, in our own environment, and then, I mean, leading by example. So, I mean, these are complex topics. These are not easy. There are no easy recipes. But the one thing that also, again, what we do in these studies is we always try to do some benchmarking to say somebody else already does it in a pretty good way. I mean, and for example, we've benchmarked all European countries on their startup ecosystem by simple metrics like number of startups founded, time and success rates, how they convert into late stage funding, how many jobs do they generate. And surprise, surprise, you will find always in each of these categories, you will always find some European countries that are outbeating the US, for example. I mean, Europe as a whole doesn't, but in some of these categories, we have very good examples in Europe. And one of our, let's say, pushs and also call-ups is to say, why don't we try to find our own benchmarks and learn from ourselves as a European community and take these learnings. And these are ways, I think, where we can help and also push for the right intentions without beating on politicians or governments, because I mean that I think will not be the solution.
That's not the most constructive approach maybe to take.
No.
At the end of every episode, we also want to kind of leverage the experience of our guests to also give kind of some recommendations to our students. And actually, we often use our guests to talk about, okay, what is the right time to start as an entrepreneur? Now, given your background and your history, I would actually want to ask you a different question, namely, what is the right point to stop as an entrepreneur? Because that's what you, at a certain point, have decided to do. You decided to stop being an entrepreneur. If you need to give kind of recommendations to other people, what kind of recommendation would you give in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think, I mean, I guess my personal story is that I somehow want to counter that you're either an entrepreneur or you're not. Like, it's this black and white thinking. I think there is always some. I mean, it's a period in life. It's maybe also. I mean, who tells that I will not become an entrepreneur again? Yeah. So I would argue. There's always. I think it really depends on a few factors. What suits you most? For sure, there is always. I think entrepreneurs. I mean, some of the characteristics I would definitely subscribe. You need to be open for, which is yes, you need to be open for taking decisions in a high degree of uncertainty. You need to deal with ambiguity. You need to also work very hard. I'm still not believing in the entrepreneur as a let's say as a hobby or as a let's say, how do you call it, as a
side job.
Side job or that. I mean, if you want to be an entrepreneur because that's hip and that's like the Berlin bubble and we're cool and party all the time. I mean, that I have not seen to succeed too often. But to the point, I think you need. I mean, you always. I think that's maybe the wisdom for life. But you need to always listen into yourself. Okay, what gets you excited? What gets you up every morning and doesn't feel like a burden, but something that you're totally excited about. And I think being an entrepreneur definitely gives you a lot of energy. Gets you a lot of this excitement of taking decisions. Making many mistakes, but then still being fast enough to learn from them. So, and I mean, to stop that or to shift it into a more stable or more secure environment, I think that's really a question of where are you on your journey? And I think it's actually good if we are getting away a bit from the image that entrepreneurs always have to be young and I mean, like big risk takers. I think there is and there are many examples that also people that then have built some deep functional technical expertise are potentially then even the better entrepreneurs because they have done some of that learning the other way around. So I guess I'm not good at giving advice now. What is the exact point of time or what's the criteria set? I think you need to listen to yourself. What suits you well. You need to also listen to your environment. I mean, as I told you my own story, there was a moment of time where my family, my wife, gave me a very clear signal. This is not the deal that we did for our life. And I have to say, my family is, for me, my number one priority. I can say so much. So if I have to compromise that, then I also think about it. And so I think you need to look into yourself and into the ones that are really close to you, and then take the decisions that you can live with, and that again get you excited and not get you bored or distracted.
Yeah, but I think that's for me already a very valuable advice. Sometimes it's about making choices, and you cannot have everything. So then, sometimes making choices also means you have to give something up. And then you have to think about what you want to give priority and accept that means that you might not be able to do other things, which is, of course, very difficult, but I think also sometimes simply necessary. And to be very honest, without talking in terms of different generations, I think if I look at the current generation of students, that's sometimes something they struggle with, that I have the feeling they want to do everything, but then by doing everything, you're actually doing nothing because you're not taking priorities. And that might actually, in that way, you might not realize the potential that you actually have, I would say.
Yeah, but I also have to say that this not having this black and white view, but I mean, for example, at McKinsey, we put a lot of effort, and I mean, it's maybe the most important, let's say, leadership dimension that we value is entrepreneurial behaviors. I mean, I think there's definitely a call up for taking initiative to be entrepreneurial. It's a bit different for sure in our context than if I'm now the founder of a GmbH and I'm essentially running everything and I decide everything. But I also want to warn that I think we should not say that only if you're in the Handelsregister, you are the owner of a company, you're an entrepreneur. I think there are very different versions of entrepreneurs. You can be also an entrepreneur in a large organization. And so I think with that also perspective that this is not a black and white thing, but there are many different ways of also living your entrepreneurial, let's say, aspiration. I think that's also something we should not forget about, because I would argue there are quite a few cap tables where that also don't make it too fun to be the entrepreneur, because I mean everybody else has the saying, and you're then the manager on your own cap table. I mean, we also know that these cases exist. So it's
okay. Good, Karel. thanks again for sharing all these insights. And again, it was great to also hear a bit more about the history of Alando, how that is kind of connected to WHO. That's always very intriguing. But we have also a kind of final question that we have every time in our podcast. So we always want to hear what kind of books you're reading at the moment or podcasts you're listening to. Do you have any suggestions for our audience?
I mean, I don't know. I assume there are a few obvious ones, but I just still call them out because, I mean,
go
that's
ahead.
indeed where I spend time with. So, I mean, one where also, which I think fits well to what you're also teaching and is the Startup Insider podcast from Jan Thomas and the gang. So, also happen to be one of their like business angels, and I think it's a good content, and I also like how Jan has sort of scaled it over the last couple of years. So that's one that I recommend, and I think it almost has daily versions and daily updates and news. So also very much up to date. I mean, the other one, which again maybe not most exotic, but I always love to read. I think he doesn't have a podcast, but he essentially does a blog. It's Ben Evans from Andreessen Horowitz, just on tech development and innovation. And I mean, I think he's always I met him a few times, and I have to say, super impressive, smart thinker, and so that's what I like to spend regular time with, because it always gives me a good benchmark. I'm afraid that he's also out there for so much time that's maybe a bit like our generation, and I'm missing maybe out on like the new sources of inspiration. But this is he and his blog is always a good place to go. And on books, I mean, I have to admit, I guess I read into books. I'm not somebody that has. I mean, I'm not the Elon Musk. Like I read 500 books every year, and these are the top 100. That's not me. I just found. I mean, one book that I came when I sometimes just do a search on Amazon, and then I found one where I also got to know the co-author many years ago. It's How Big Things Get Done. It's maybe the opposite of what we discussed earlier, and it's a guy called Bert Fleiberg. It's a Danish professor at Oxford, and we at McKinsey once did a lot of statistical analysis on large projects and large program success factors. So that's a book I just stumbled over, and I think it's just getting published this month. So that's a read that I want to take, because I mean, quite relevant also for what I do in my daily life on large transformations and large programs. But again, maybe not the book for getting inspired for a startup, but maybe yes. I mean, maybe there are some things that are relevant for large programs or big projects that you can again also build a business idea and build a business proposition on. So these are a few ideas. But I mean, in the end, I think there's interestingly there's so much out there that I have to admit I'm not coping with it. And I like your question, because I mean it may just give different ideas and helps us to navigate it, but I think it's super tough these days to really navigate all of that. So I stay with some sources that I've gotten, like, let's say, have tapped into many years ago, and so that's where I get my inspiration from.
Perfect. Okay, Karel, then I would really like to thank you for spending some of your precious time for this podcast. It was great talking to you. And I also hope that our audience has enjoyed this episode. If you like it, please don't hesitate to give us a good rating on your favorite podcast platform. And thanks for listening again. Bye.
Super. Thanks, Chris. Thank you. Bye-bye.